Well, to Brisbane now, and it's housed 8 premiers of Queensland and played centre stage to the biggest political dramas of the past 4 decades. Now, the executive building is to be replaced with a new entertainment venture, while public servants move to a new building. The government this week shortlisted 6 developers to build the new precinct, a project it says will revitalise that part of the city and provide accommodation savings to the public purse. But opponents say Queensland can't afford the building project or the loss of history. Here's Francine Norton.
The towering executive building on 100 George Street has been the epicentre of political power in Queensland since 1971. It's where the big decisions are made that affect everyone in the state. And in Queensland, politics are anything but dry. Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen was the first Premier to take up residence. Since then, the executive building has seen some tumultuous days.
If the walls could only talk up there in the cabinet room, we'd hear some wonderful, wonderful, colourful stories.
Channel 9 political reporter Spencer Jolly has spent more time at the executive building than most politicians. Since 1979, he's witnessed all the drama on George Street.
Right at the end, when the cabinet turned on Joh and told him that he had to go, it was Don Lane, the late Don Lane, who just screwed up all his cabinet papers into balls of paper and threw them at Joh down the end of the table and used a string of profanities and told him basically that he was finished. You have to go, Joh.
Sir Joh's dignity has also been betrayed by the refusal of 5 ministers to resign.
I mean, Joh sacking 4 or 5 ministers in one day, trying to preserve his numbers. We were camped up there basically day after day after day during that tumultuous period. I mean, look at the minority governments. You've got Liz Cunningham, member for Gladstone, who put the Borbridge-Sheldon government in. I mean, we were following her up. I've never seen a press scrum like it. This poor little woman in the middle of this, walking up to George Street to go and have a meeting with Rob Borbridge, who was desperate to get her vote.
The building signalled the start of the Bjelke-Petersen development spree. Nothing stood in the way of progress then, not even the historic Bellevue Hotel in 1979.
A very, very poor construction, really, when it's all said and done, and when you look at the whole building, it's just a heap of rubble, really. And there's no way in the world you could do anything with it other than demolish it and rebuild it.
Save the Bellevue!
There's a fine line between progress and retaining history, a line which Brisbane has stepped over many times.
A procession of bulldozers, front-end loaders and dump trucks making their way through the gate were greeted with chanting and booing from the distraught crowd.
Fast forward 3 decades, this symbol of progress is now on the current Premier's hit list.
The carpets are threadbare, soiled. There's grime all over the walls. So how can people be expected to enjoy going to work in those conditions?
730 Queensland was given access to the building to see the conditions firsthand. Paint peeling off the roof, sticky taped windows and exposed wiring shows the place could use some sprucing up. Walking through the corridors of the executive building exposes some of the problems the staff here face. Cramped conditions in some quarters, homemade repair jobs in other areas. It's clear the interior of this building at least hasn't aged gracefully. But are these problems that are easily fixable? Or do they warrant the Premier's grand plan of tearing it down and starting again?
We're then going to knock down the executive building and the public works building. Anyone upset about that? No, okay, good. And what we're going to do then is have a tender process for a new 5-star hotel and public open space. It could be a casino, it could be our answer to Crown.
The government's moving quickly to relocate public servants to a purpose-built tower on William Street, opposite Parliament House. It would be in private hands and leased back to the government. The executive and public works buildings will then be demolished for the new entertainment area.
Look, I think the government has all the power to be able to actually really revitalise that precinct.
David Goodwin from the Chamber of Commerce and Industry says now is the best time to get the best price to build it.
I think it is an opportunity. Clearly, they need to change the shape of it. They need to make it big enough and they need to make it good enough and engaging enough so that nobody's out of pocket but it still provides that stimulus into the economy.
Engaging in essentially monument building projects and then justifying them as economic stimulus, I think makes no sense at all.
At $2 billion, economics professor John Quiggin says it's a luxury project which doesn't fit well with the government's fiscal emergency rhetoric, and he doubts it could be cost neutral.
The effect of the public-private partnership and the suggested casino means simply that the very substantial increase in debt, which this project will undoubtedly cause, can be hidden first in the accounts of the public-private partnership, and second by throwing in an exceptionally valuable casino licence into the mix.
Across the city landscape, the executive building may have lost some of its aesthetic appeal, but as an architectural design, it's rare.
The expression of the building's quite blunt. I guess it's very direct. I think over time, though, it's probably become to be much more admired than perhaps it might have been by the profession or by the community at large.
Architect Doug Neal says regardless of the building's shortcomings, the government has a bigger duty to the community.
To convert that to a private concern, I think is short-term thinking. I think it denies the role of civic space as something that governments have a kind of a collective responsibility for. The notion that a private businessman would then act as the landlord for a state government must be close to comedy gold.
The Queensland of today has been greatly shaped by the events that have taken place inside the walls of the executive building and the people who've traversed its halls. It's about to make way for progress, and when it's gone, it will take its history with it too.